All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight on your brain.
Yes, sir. It's hot outside. So we're doing this in the
Yeah.
middle of the day because I'm tired of hauling rocks in 100-degree and humid. Well, it's 90 something, but real feel is 100 and it's like 80% humidity here.
It's the beginning of May, so it's summertime in Texas. It has
Yeah,
arrived.
we had our 2 weeks of California weather, and now it is going to be like this for the rest of the summer.
So today's a bit of a goulash. I want to start with just a real quick follow-up to what we've been talking about the last couple of times. I have a prediction on the Roe v. Wade decision of what I think is actually going to happen. So I'm gonna put myself on the record here with all of the caterwauling on the one side and the celebrating on the other side. People seem to keep forgetting that this isn't official yet. No. It's a draft from February. And we know from numerous previous reports that Chief Justice Roberts is a political weasel and he is easily influenced by public opinion. So I think what's going to happen here is that because what he cares about more than the actual law is the integrity and the status of the court. So it would be too much of an overcorrection to simply flip from a 5-4 striking down Roe and Casey to a 5-4 upholding it. So I think Roberts is going to, behind the scenes, push for a compromise decision. And what's going to end up coming out as the official decision is going to be quite different from that leaked draft. That they are somehow going to attempt to split the baby, pun intended, because dark humor is great. And allow for more state restrictions than have been allowed in the past, but not go as far as what the Dobson case is all about, and not go as far as that Alito draft decision of completely overturning Roe and Casey. He's somehow going to try and split the baby, and wave a magic wand. And I was originally going to say because Roberts is dumb as a box of rocks, but that's not true, and it's dangerous to think that. He's insanely narcissistic. He believes he's the smartest guy in the room, and he believes that he is the one who can bridge these divides. This is what he did with the Obamacare decision, or decisions. There were a couple of them. This is what he did there, and I think he's going to try and do it again because he thinks, I can wave my magic wand. I'm so smart that I can help craft this decision that is going to bring the two sides together and heal the nation. And instead, it's going to make it worse.
That sounds attractive, except that we have two instances in recent history that make me believe otherwise. And the first one is on the vaccine mandates. And what ended up happening on high was they kicked it back because they said, no, this is a legislature issue. Y'all have had time, y'all have time, go do your job. So that was number one. And the second one is, you talked about with restrictions, we already have had the Texas heartbeat bill go all the way to the Supreme Court, and they upheld it. So it was already within the framework of Roe v. Wade, according to their.
They didn't quite uphold it. It was more political, or it was more legalese than that.
Well, yeah, I'm simplifying, obviously, but at the same time, they were already within the framework. Why would you change anything if you were already doing that? So those two things make me think that they're going to go. I think they're going to kick it back and say, you need to handle this as a congressional branch. I don't know. And then we'll do our job to make sure what you did is constitutional. So that's where I think it's going to go. So we'll see whose prediction is correct, or at least more correct. Neither of us are probably going to be 100%, but we'll see where it goes.
I will be absolutely shocked if the leaked draft is what comes out as the decision. I think if Roberts was actually serious about investigating and about upholding the integrity of the court, what he should do is send a clear message to the court, the clerks, and the people at large that we're not going to play these games. And since you leaked it, he has the authority. Generally, all of these decisions come out in June. They're done by June 30th. He has the authority to issue it now. He could say, all right, this is official now. We're going to issue our decision.
Well, and let's also look at the talk coming out on our way to June, because the last thing Roberts wants is a packing of the court. And if the administration and the current powers that be start talking that way, he might try to compromise in some way.
And there's historical precedent for that as well.
Yeah. So we'll see who's more correct, or if we're both wrong, or we're both right in some way, shape, or form, or whatever. So enough of the annoying things. Let's talk about some fun things. On the docket today, if we can get through it, we're going to try to stay under an hour and a half here. We're going to talk some mixed martial arts, because we have a former legendary mixed martial artist running for governor in Hawaii. Then we're going to do, I don't know what order you want to do it, the concept of luck, and actually in regards to how it fits with religion. And then the last thing we want to talk is a kind of a 300-foot overview of fathers and daughters and how the females develop. And I'm going to include brothers in that as well. So male influences on females as they grow up, because that was the crossover topic we got from our book read that actually has social impacts. So anything you want to add to the list before we go on?
No, I still haven't had time to listen to the Rogan interview of BJ Penn. I'll probably try and listen to it when I'm working out today.
So this is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
For those, I don't know what our audience is. For those that in our audience that watch mixed martial arts, and I'm going to try to do a title to pull in some people.
Yeah.
BJ Penn is one of the best ever. I mean,
those are some great ears.
Hands down, one of the best ever. This is a man who, he's smaller than me. So he fought at 155 and at 170, and at one point held the title at 155 and 170. He dropped all the way down to 145, which in that interview he says is a mistake, which I 100% agree with. Dropped all the way down to 145, but also ate and gained weight to fight at heavyweight so he could fight one of the other best ever, Lyoto Machida. So he gained weight to fight one of the best heavyweights ever.
I thought it was light heaveweight.
He was a light heavyweight, but I think at the time he was
okay.
Well, this was back before they even had they've distributed the weight class more too.
Okay.
So there used to be
that's right.
There used to be just light, middle, and heavy, and there used to be none realistically. And then it was light, middle, and heavy. Then they added welter, and then all these other weight classes. That was part of the discussion too about weight classes.
Penn was an interesting and fun guy to watch because he looks slow because he's so methodical. But then kind of if you get an eye for these things, you can tell that when he moves, he's explosive. But he seems like he's slow because he was so methodical in his approach.
Well, he knocked out heavyweights. We know he's explosive.
Yeah.
But this is something I try to teach my athletes, because it's a lot of times is a missing link. And you look at the greatest athletes across the history of all sports, they actually move so efficiently that they don't seem like they're moving as much.
Yes.
You know, we poo-poo on them on the social issues, but let's give LeBron James credit on a basketball arena. Is when he makes his move from outside the 3-point line to the hoop, he's there in 3 steps.
Yeah.
He's not chopping his feet. He's not flipping his hips all over the place. When he makes his move, it is 1 step, 2 step, hoop. He's done. That's why these people that think they have him guarded are so surprised that he's by them. He is efficiently fast. And so what I try to do is teach my athletes to get from one place to the other in as few steps as possible, because that's power, that's surprise, that's efficiency. And he was that way when it came to his grappling and his boxing as well. So when he threw a punch, it was deceptively powerful because it came at you like a wrecking ball instead of a hammer. It was like a whip action, and that's a combination of using your power but being relaxed at the same time.
I don't know anything about his politics because I haven't listened to this interview and I haven't looked into it yet. But I would be inclined to vote for him just because of where he comes from. I think I've mentioned this before, but all the other sports and extracurriculars that my son wanted to do, I gave him the choice and I asked him if he was interested in this thing or that thing, except for wrestling. I made him wrestle. It was the one thing I made him do, because combat sports teach you more, and to use your word, more efficiently than just about any other endeavor you can do. I mean, we've said before multiple times, this is someone who's never had his ass kicked and it shows. And that's something combat sports can do for you without getting in an actual fight.
Well, I can speak from experience here, but let me start with his motivations. His motivation for running. So this is I'm going to kind of condense this almost 3-hour interview into hopefully 20 or 30 minutes here. His motivation, his main motivation is, well, he recently retired. He fought for 20 years. Yeah. He's exactly our age. He's 43. So he fought for 20 years. Our whole MMA watching life, he's been fighting.
Yeah.
And then and so he kind of settled into retirement, but then of course we had the lockdowns, we had all of these things happening, and he knows a lot of people. He's one of the most famous people in Hawaii, and it's not that big of a place, you know, so he knows almost everybody that you need to know in that area, including politicians, including celebrities, everything else. So his main motivation though was he saw a lot of crap that was going on, and his kids are kind of like, you fought all your life, why don't you fight this? And he kind of did some soul searching, and he goes over this in more detail. Again, this is the Cliff Notes version, that he didn't know if he wanted to run as a Democrat or Republican. They don't have an independent party in Hawaii. You have to go through that whole process. So he thought about running as a Democrat because he's something in between. He really is a centrist, independent when it comes to policy, and they kind of didn't want him because they're the incumbent. You know, they weren't going to back him in any kind of funding or anything like that. So he talked to a guy with the Republican Party, and they're like, with your name recognition, yeah, come on in. And so that's why he's running as a Republican. He was kind of in between. They didn't have an independent party. He didn't want to run with the Libertarians, and one party wanted him, one party didn't. So when you talk about policy, there's your kind of set point. And then he really started getting into it, and he started even expanding upon his original thing was, hey, we need to fight this crap that's going on. And then after that, it kind of developed into more. But one of the things he brings to the table in any interview or debate he's been in so far is, what about this? And if it's something that he's not trained in, he says, well, I'm going to develop a team, just like I did in mixed martial arts. So if in mixed martial arts, if I needed help with boxing, you hired a boxing coach. When I needed help with strength and conditioning, I hired these coaches, and they talk about that for a while. You know, when I needed help with my speed, I got these coaches. And you just develop this team over time where everybody works together to fill everything out. And then as the target of that team, you go into the ring and you put it all together. And so he said, I'm going to build a team just like I did for mixed martial arts, just like I became one of the baddest men in the world.
Mhm.
I want to be the best governor in the world. And he said, I only want one term, unless there's a big project that needs more than one. But other than that, one term just to right the ship, and then I'm out. And so that's kind of the platform he's running on.
And that just strengthens my position of I would vote for someone like this even before I knew his politics, because you can campaign on anything you want, but what are you actually going to do? And I'm gonna tread lightly here because at some point I want to crap all over Donald Trump. Um,
We'll get there. We'll get there.
yeah,
We got plenty of time
but
for that.
just as a quick and glaring example, a lot of people who did not support him in 2016 ended up supporting him in 2020 because of what he did during his presidency, the things he actually did. The problem was that last year, and even the people that ended up supporting them will and have said this, is when push came to shove and the swamp, as he liked to call it, pushed back against him, he crumbled. He wasn't there. He didn't stand up to them. Penn seems like the kind of person, because of his background, that if he says, I'm going to do these things, when the entrenched interests, both the politicians, the big business people, the special interests, when they push back, he's going to stand firm. Now, that doesn't mean he's actually going to be able to accomplish what he wants, but he's at least not going to buckle. He's at least going to keep things from moving backwards any further.
Well, one of the things that's going on in Hawaii right now, and don't call me a professional because I don't live there, but just listening to him talk about it, he was speaking very candidly, is the economy there is crumbling.
Yeah.
And the biggest part of that is the restrictions. I mean, we look at this island that really, I can compare it to Galveston Island here. So Galveston Island is very, very, very much dependent on local tourism. Right? People don't come from all over the world to go to Galveston, but people come from all over Texas to go to Galveston. Mm-hmm. And when that gets even slightly interrupted, it kind of crumbles really quickly. Yeah. Businesses go down. When we moved here in 2007, we went down to Galveston to a little bar joint right on the water called the Blue Hole, and they had free blue crab during the season on Tuesdays because they expected you to come in and buy drinks and all of that to go along with it. So they had their crab traps out and they would boil them and do a crab boil. Everybody's having fun. It's free. And you buy the beers and you buy the drinks to go along with it. And Ike came through, and just that 3 or 4 weeks of not being able to be open and be serving the community was enough to destroy that business. And so now we're looking at 2 years in. They still have more restrictions in Hawaii than most states around the country. So when you rely on a certain industry and that industry crumbles, it destroys everything. So one of his big things in his platform is to make Hawaii more sustainable, self-sustainable. So he's like, there's this movement to plant trees in all these areas. Well, every single tree better have fruit on it. Why are planes coming in with imports and leaving empty? And so he's got some ideas on that, but he's obviously, this is a developing project as he's running, but it's the concept. At least someone's identifying this. Planes come full, leave empty. That's a bad thing in every economy, right?
Yeah.
People come in and nobody has any resource to go out, right? That's a bad thing in any economy. So he's identifying these problems and trying to put a team of professionals around himself that can help address these problems. Other things, I don't know if he can handle, but he brought up, there's apparently a federal law that every ship that comes in with imports from other countries has to go to California and then to Hawaii. They can't come directly to Hawaii. And part of it is the ports can't handle some of these bigger ships. But at the same time, he lists the actual bill number and everything like that. So a lot of these little things, I don't know how much he's going to have the power to address, but at the same time, he's at least in the right direction, in my opinion.
Well, I wish him luck because we need more governors like DeSantis, and I don't mean that necessarily in policy. We need the reason he's so good and the reason he's so likable isn't just for the policies. It's one, it's the way he stands up and stands firm, and two, it sounds like Penn genuinely believes in what he's saying. If he's able to sit there with Rogan and talk for hours, you said some of it was MMA stuff, but he talked the politics a lot too. If he's able to sit there on his own without advisors, just talking to someone and explaining these things so that they're easily understood, that is a valuable and necessary skill, because you need to be able to push back against the entrenched interests, which, I mentioned the politicians, the special interests in the business. I should throw media in there too, because they are an entrenched interest and they have their own agenda. And that's really where DeSantis is good and has made his bones, is by pushing back against the media in a way that isn't just combative, but actually has substance behind it.
There's another level to this that I wanted to talk about, and this is where the personal experience comes in. Mixed martial arts, to me, I love watching football, American football, from the strategy standpoint, from the athleticism. The way the game plays out is quite interesting to me. But when it comes to reality and what is the best sport on earth, it truly is mixed martial arts. There is a little bit of everything you have to address in life. Randomness, there is strategy, there is how diversified are you, how well trained are you, what's your work ethic, all of those things, what's your intelligence level, what's your physical strength. Every single bit of life is in that octagon or ring with you. And back in the day I competed, and the early days of BJ Penn, and this is the layer that I wanted to get to, there was a giant, trying to think of the right word to put here, but a feeling of humility. Everybody was respectful. Everybody was, to some degree, even though he was one of the baddest people in the world, he had a humility to him. And this came through in this interview, the way they just talked, they just got nostalgic about a lot of things, and the compliments they gave every fighter he fought, every fighter that's fighting now, every fighter that was great. And just the community that was involved with it was different. And I kind of got turned off. What turned me off from mixed martial arts these days is the show around it right now.
Yeah.
Is the I hate you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I don't know when it flipped, but you could see it kind of happening a lot. Now, there were always the hotheads out there back in the day, but at the same time, the community itself was exactly the opposite of that. You had two people coming into an arena where you're trying, the goal of the game is to hurt the other guy enough that you win.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike football, where it's to get to a line, or basketball to put a ball through a hoop. The goal of the game is to hurt somebody enough that they can't keep going. But we still had this community. And go ahead and say what you're going to say, and I'll give you personal examples of that.
In part because it was so hard that you understand. So there used to be, until Obama started to break this, but there used to be this unwritten rule that former presidents did not criticize current president, because they knew how hard the job was. Even if they completely disagreed with their policy, they knew the strain that person was under, so they wouldn't comment on it. And I think that has a lot to do with it, and a lot to do with why you have a camaraderie with like people who wrestled in high school, and they'll form kind of a camaraderie and reminisce about that because of the strenuous nature of it. And I think what was, I'm brain farting on his name, the California kind of jerk who fought Liddell several times.
Tito
I feel
Ortiz.
Tito. I feel
Yeah.
like he was the first bad boy. But
Remember, he
one,
ran for office too. Was it
yeah,
mayor of LA or something?
something like that.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the reasons that rivalry was so big is because he was kind of an aberration in the way that he behaved.
Mhm. Yeah, he might have been the first one. And it's funny because personally, in real life, he's not that way.
Yeah.
He was just selling tickets to the show. And it kind of started that whole kind of
Yep.
movement towards the Conor McGregors of the day and spitting in each other's face. And it was just a different thing. I had a coach that was, he was kind of like that. He really good technically as a coach, and he was a great athlete himself. He fought with Hammerhouse. He was with Coleman and Randleman and all those guys. And he kicked my ass many times in the gym. But he was kind of a hothead. His dad was my main coach, and his dad worked with Dan Severn and was way back in the day, in the early days. And he was really cool and collected. But his son, it's kind of the assistant coach. He was in my corner for several fights. And remember the one I told you about where I had to pee on the way out there? Yeah. So he was in my corner for that one. And he would say things in your ear while you're walking out to the ring. He's like, this guy's breaking into your house to rape your wife, and trying to fire you up. And I just look at him and just be like, how about I just hate losing? Maybe that's motivation enough for me. I don't need to pretend this. Actually, we talked at weigh-ins and he's really cool, and loser buys the beers. So how about we just go out there and compete? And then I went out there and got kicked harder than I've ever been kicked in my entire life, but I still won the fight, so that's okay. And he bought the beers, so we're cool.
I brought up that Fight World show, and that is something I didn't mention that kind of just now jumped out at me, is there is a universal language when it comes to combat sports that every one of these Thai fighters said, which you can also hear in the first episode. He's in Mexico because there's a particular style of Mexican boxing, and boxing is huge in Mexico. And you hear the same thing there. You'll hear the same thing here in the US in wrestling or MMA gyms, that your opponent is yourself. That's who you're trying to beat. Ultimately, your opponent is yourself, and you have to overcome that. And you're saying, I just hate losing. That's what sparked that is a familiar refrain in every language where people fight, which is every language.
Yeah, it's an experience. It's one of the I'm trying to think of the top things. Obviously, becoming a dad is the top thing in my life. Getting married and going through that experience, going through the selection process and finding what you need. But then also when you talk about more visceral experiences I've had in my life, I think when I did the NASA research, did the Vomit Comet research and everything, is one of them. And the fact that I did that, this thing that I always thought was cool, but it's really, Peterson talks about this a lot, putting purposeful stress on yourself. And I was scared to death to do it. I was scared to sign up for my first class, because it was no longer doing katas and forms and all of those things we did, and even light sparring with your partner or whatever. It was actually learning to do this thing to compete. And there's no point in taking that kind of damage unless you're going to go along with it.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a step in my life that actually, I think even to this day, I don't think I could have started this podcast had I not taken that step before, because walking out to the ring or the cage was the hardest part of everything. All the beatings, all the 3-hour practices, all the dehydration, cutting weight sucked. Cutting weight really sucked. But walking that little 30-second to a minute and a half walk out to the ring was the hardest part every time. And I wouldn't take that back for the world, even though I, broke 4 ribs at one point, or probably almost killed myself cutting weight a couple times because I was at stage 19 of 20 in dehydration. I think if I was to go back, and they actually talked about this in that podcast, and I 100% agree. We need a better weigh-in strategy. Going back, I would fight at middleweight if I had to go back, because then it would be a pound or two to cut here and there. And my last fight I lost, and getting out of it when I did is probably one of my regrets. But that's when I broke all those ribs, and then ended up having a son on the way and having to get serious about life. So, but I lost my last fight, and the reason I lost 100% I can attribute to the fact that I cut 20 pounds for that fight, and he cut maybe 2. And we got 2 rounds of me beating the shit out of somebody, but I can't finish it.
Yeah.
And just the way I get off the stool going into the 3rd round, you can see my face is just drawn.
You're done.
Gaunt. Yeah. And I hit him with a solid right hook. And that was my power shot, was the right hook. I hit him with a solid right hook halfway through that round. And in my mind, I saw him going like, hit me harder. He did this little head shake, hit me harder. When I watched the video later, I staggered him. But my mind had taken over with this other perception. So, but let's get back to where we were talking about. The humility back then was different. So someone like Penn, we're going to have this problem going forward because we're all fed up with career politicians. And the biggest downfall to him is going to be his inexperience. The fact that he could fall for things that a career politician would not have. But we have the human side. And now we got trade-offs. He's going to make mistakes from inexperience. And how he handles it, we'll see what kind of team he puts around himself.
Yeah.
And this is where Trump went wrong. Trump's biggest mistakes were from his not being a career politician. They weren't from what he wanted to do, what his platform was, or anything. Even when it comes to the election fortification at the end, all these Trump appointed judges were people who stabbed him in the back later.
Yeah.
It was inexperience. His inexperience was his biggest problem.
He had to rely on others. And I would say, though, that I would slightly disagree that his arrogance was his bigger problem. His narcissism was his bigger problem, because if you listen to what he said, if you read even parts of The Art of the Deal, and one of the most mind-boggling things he said during the campaign, which turned off a lot of conservatives and a lot of the religious right, is, I've never asked God for forgiveness because I've never made a mistake. That's straight out of The Art of the Deal. You never show weakness, and apologizing or admitting a mistake is a weakness.
I should have put up 48 rules to power.
Yeah. Now, there is a danger here because of our radical reflexive cancel culture, but where someone like BJ Penn could grow his base is if he can come out and say, look, I'm not a politician, and this particular thing didn't go right. I screwed the pooch here. Admit that I got this wrong, and then explain why. Say, because of this. So now I know this. So if something like this happens again, I won't make the same mistake. I won't have the wool pulled over my eyes. And that's something that anyone who has never thought about going into politics, and we need more people like Penn now, especially at the local level, at the city council, and probably more importantly, the school board level. Regular people who have never thought about this need to step up into these roles and keep that in mind of, look, I've never thought about politics. Be upfront with people. And I think you'll be able to, if you can articulate that, I think you'll be surprised at how many people will be turned on by that rather than turned off by that.
So I'm cautiously optimistic that first of all, he's going to be able to pull it off, and second of all,
Yeah.
He is from that breed of humble fighters, which is amazing considering how fast he rose up at such a young age. I mean, he was training jujitsu for 3 years and he was a world champion. It takes 4, 5, 6 years to get a black belt. Yeah, and that's if you have a legit coach. So
Yeah.
he was submitting world-class jiu-jitsu athletes as a 16-year-old. It's amazing that he's as humble as he is going forward. But
because he was a legitimate phenom, a legitimate young phenom.
Well, there's a testament to the fact that when you know, there's no puffing yourself up. True, one of the best groups of people I've ever worked with was when I worked with airstrike operations. So we did the combatives and the strength and conditioning for them. And I got to roll around and wrestle with these guys and basically learn how to not get killed and kill somebody quickly. And these were the most humble people I've ever seen. I've ever worked with. They were more respectful to me as their coach than any kid I've ever trained. And these people could kill you by looking at you. You know, it was we would do a 3-hour strength and conditioning and combatives, anti-wrestling and things like that. And then they would go do a 20-mile ruck. And sometimes we would get them back a month later and not all of them were there. And there's a reason not all of them were there. It wasn't discipline. It was the fact that not all of them are here. And that was another experience I think I'd never want to not have again, because I got to work with those guys. It gave me an appreciation of that process, definitely. But yeah, that's the mentality we have going into it, and hopefully good comes out of it. And if not, hopefully he at least ruffles enough feathers that some changes come out of it. But I think that's going to be the new history of politics in America. Is we're going to start seeing these people that have name recognition stepping forward just because the career politicians are same old.
Well, that would actually be a reversion, and it would be a welcome one, because that was the way the founders in the first half century of our country, that's how they envisioned it, and that's how they acted. Is you went and you lived life, you made a name for yourself, and then you went and you served as a true public servant, not the way we use the term now, but as a true public servant in some form of elected office for a short time, and then you went back to life. That would be a welcome reversion to the way things are supposed to be.
Well, shit, if anybody needs to brush up on their history, start reading more about Benjamin Franklin. That guy was an amazing human being. He's right there with Plato and Aristotle and Confucius and everybody else. So yeah, that's a good place to start. What do we want to move on to next? We gotta.
Well, let's, you had some interesting thoughts on luck.
Yes. Okay. So luck is an interesting concept, because what is it, right? I had a conversation with someone that I was talking about luck and the science behind luck, because there is some of that, which we'll dive into. And we might have a whole episode about it if we want to, if people like this conversation. But on a religious end, it was everything happens for a reason. There is no such thing as luck, right? To me, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Because what we call luck, and this is a definition. How would you say that word? Definitional? Yeah, definitional kind of way to put it is we have to define what luck is. And we have things in our life that are 100% under our control, theoretically. But then things happen that are outside of our control. And when things happen outside of our control, we call that luck, right? We don't call it, either luck or randomness, right? So I think the religious argument is actually not valid when it comes to the luck argument, because it doesn't matter what the underlying cause of the things that are outside of our control are. They're still outside of our control.
Yeah. Well, there's also a difference between everything happens for a reason and there's a plan. Sure, everything happens for a reason. That's basic Newtonian physics.
Yeah.
One particle
My
bumps
favorite
into
quote
another
is that
particle,
everything
bumps
happens
into
for a
another.
reason, and sometimes the reason is you're stupid. Yeah.
That too, exactly. But this is something that I wasn't thinking about this, or I actually would have gone and prepared a little bit. But this is something that bothers me as a Christian, is this idea that everything happens according to God's plan. I don't think that's right scripturally, because there's plenty of places where it talks about God knowing things. God is all knowing and he has made plans, but that doesn't mean that just because he knows a thing is going to happen, he planned for that thing to happen.
Well, and we kind of cross streams here, because now we get in the concept of free will as well.
Uh-huh.
So there can't be an overarching plan that it encompasses everything you do if you have free will. There can be one from a universal standpoint that all these things are going to end up being a clockwork at some point, but
Yeah.
you can't have an individual universal plan if you have free will, because if you have free will, you can always step outside of that plan. And if you can't ever step outside of that plan, then you have no free will.
Exactly.
Uh,
And free will is critical to Christian theology.
mhm.
Judeo-Christian theology, because it's especially pronounced in the New Testament, but it goes back to the beginning of the Bible, and in the first story, Adam and Eve. Okay, if God planned for Adam and Eve to eat of the fruit and be cast out of the garden, that says something with some negative connotations about God. There's a difference between he planned for them to do this and he set the tree there knowing they would do that, because then that says something about us and our nature, which is important and profound. I think Peterson has talked about this in his Old Testament lectures, about the Garden of Eden and the fruit and the fall of man and all this stuff. And there's a ton of philosophy there. Douglas Murray talked about this with Crowder, and I'd never heard him talk about this before. He calls himself an atheist Christian, which is a bit confusing. I think a better term is secular Christian, because we already have the term secular Jew, because you're ethnically a Jew, you're culturally a Jew, but you're not devout, you're not practicing. And he explains it very well, though, that look, I grew up in a culture that is heavily influenced by Christianity, and you better recognize that, or you're going to end up where we are, which is breaking and undoing all these things. And the free will component of Christianity was a major component that led to the Enlightenment and the idea of individual liberty. Because if you have individual choice, then you have individual autonomy, then you have individual liberty. But I feel like I've gone a little bit afield of luck and free will.
No. It actually, it all comes into the same thing, because I was pouring through this, and one of my favorite, I think the best example of this is the Serenity Prayer, right? So give me the strength to handle the things that I can, give me the courage, or what is it? Strength to handle the things I can't control, the courage to handle the things I can, and then the wisdom to see the difference between them. And the backing behind it, the scripture backing behind it, I mean, some biblical scholar can probably come in here and give us some more, but it's almost like you're actually mandated to get that wisdom.
Mm.
What is under your control? So now we got a free will component. What is not under your control? We've got a God's plan component. How you feel about the things under your control is different if you believe in God's plan versus randomness, right? So if something random happens that is unfortunate for you, it does feel a lot different.
Mhm.
If you think it's for a better reason, or if it's because the world sucks, right? The way you come out of it is different, but they still happen. And now we need the wisdom. So we're commanded to have the wisdom to differentiate between the two, because I live in this world that is under this plan. I need to be able to understand what my part is in this world. And from a religious standpoint, you're furthering God's plan if you understand your part in it.
Yes.
From a secular standpoint, you're at least eliminating the things that you could have prevented. Right. So it's important no matter how you look at it.
Yeah.
And the science behind luck is actually one behind observation, if you really think about it, because there's randomness in life, but how you actually observe the life around you and then react to it can make you feel lucky or make you feel unlucky.
That I think I've mentioned before that I heard an SF guy define luck as when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah, I just heard that from Douglas Murray too today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this ties into what sparked all this, which is our reread and our talk about the Wheel of Time and the character of Matt. And kind of the most recent example in the book we're going through, The Shadow Rising, he's playing cards with a group of people and he has luck. He has been dealt a good hand. But if he can't use that good hand, it doesn't matter, because the people at the table are shifting around like they're about to be out of the game and about to, call it quits and be done for the night. So one, he had to be able to read that is, his good hand, his good luck would have been worthless if he couldn't read that. Oh, these people are about to, take their money and go home, and I've got a winning hand here. I don't want them to leave. So one, he had to have the ability and the skill, and then the courage, or the ability and the skill to recognize that, and then the ability and the skill and the courage to do something about it. The courage to speak up, and in the example, use self-deprecating humor to put them at ease so that he could take advantage of his luck.
Well, let's go to poker. So you're talking about cards.
Mm-hmm.
A 2-7 hand is the worst to get in Texas Hold'em. 2-7 is statistically the worst, but people have won with a 2-7 hand. So you could get the 2-7 and decide to fold, which is probably the smart choice 99% of the time. Mm-hmm. But you could also get the 2-7 and read the room. What is everybody else doing when they look at their cards? We talk about poker face, right? What's the first card that comes out? Maybe it's something, maybe I get another 2 or another 7. Okay, now I've automatically have a better hand. And so the smart move is to fold, but you can use your cognitive ability to create more luck. And we get that with life, right? So choose your parents wisely. It's one of the old sayings. Choose your parents wisely. Shaquille O'Neal and what's her name? Leslie, the tall basketball player. If they had a kid, that would be the definition of choosing your parents wisely, right? Because that would be a basketball phenom, as long as they fed him well and brought him up properly. So Lisa Leslie, that's the name I was thinking of, or Brittany Grimes, or any of those big female basketball players. If they had a kid, you picked your parents properly. But if your dad's 5'3" and your mom's 5'1", your chances of playing professional basketball are probably very low, unless you're the next Bud Webb. It's a bad luck situation if you love basketball. Now, the same thing, socioeconomic status, what country you're born in, that makes a huge difference. any of these things that you had no control over. That's luck. Now, how you handle it, that's on you. And I don't care if you're a Christian or a Muslim or Buddhist or whatever, how you handle the hand you're dealt is on you. And the great thing about life is we're handed many hands. We can fold on some, we can play some others, and we can, sometimes you lose, sometimes you win, and sometimes you win big. So that's the awesome thing about life. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with it to begin with.
And yeah, the point of that is, ties into our sign off when we remember to do it, which is, go make yourself healthier. We don't mean that just physically, although that is a part of it, is making yourself healthier, making yourself stronger physically and mentally is what enables you to take advantage of those hands when they're dealt.
I don't know who this quote is because I'm pretty sure it's not the person photoed, but this plays right into it. Yeah, depression is legitimate. But if you don't exercise, eat nutritious food, get sunlight, get enough sleep, consume positive material, and surround yourself with support, then you aren't giving yourself a fighting chance. Bad luck, you're prone to depression. But if you're not doing all those other things, then it's not luck at that point.
Yeah.
So we have to take a look at life and say, what was random and what was in my control? And the thing that's great news, because if you find things that are in your control, you can change your behavior. And if it was completely random, well, how do I go forward from here? You randomly get cancer. Okay, that sucks. That sucks really bad. What's the best treatment option? That's the next step. How do I recover from that treatment option? Because cancer treatments actually tear you up pretty badly as well. So it's what's the next best step? Now, we look back and we say, okay, it was lung cancer, but I smoked like a chimney. Well, maybe the first step is to stop smoking. Right? I have heart issues because I'm severely obese. What's the next step? Maybe the first step is to lose weight. So it not only helps us identify where what we could have done differently, but also how we go forward. And that's the main point. You have to be able to differentiate. And I don't think religion plays into it, because it doesn't matter what the underlying reason of the things that are out of your control are. They're still out of your control. And the ones that are, you need to have the wisdom to figure it out.
Well, I just thought of something is, no, religion does play into it, because it's that with your meme, that's part of your support structure, or should be.
This is true. This is true.
Or should be, unless you are using that as an excuse. And that's kind of what I was trying to attack at the beginning with well, it's all part of a plan. Okay, well, you can use that to comfort yourself, but most likely you're using that as an excuse to say, this is out of my control. So if I can't do anything about it, then why should I even try?
Well, and that's a double-edged sword, because sometimes it's comforting and sometimes it's not. Because then you start thinking thoughts like, if this is part of a plan, why me? We all celebrate the story of Job, right? Because he came out in the positive on the other end. But what if you were Job? Do you have the mental fortitude? Yeah. Do you have the mental fortitude to go through all of that and still be positive at the other end of it? And that's where it's kind of like I said, a double-edged sword on that, because there are plenty of people suffering in this world that are seeing all the people not suffering and saying, why me? Why me? And that's where part of it is important, to be able to differentiate what's in your control, because 90% of the time, at least, the why me is in your control. And that can be abstract, right? I have severe addiction, right? Well, a lot of addiction is kind of out of your control, because we wouldn't call it addiction otherwise. It would be just bad habits. But at the same time, there are steps you can do to correct that. It just takes a lot of work. And so the why me, we have to be able to differentiate between random chance and what's in my control, or we never correct the why me.
Yep.
So that's my big thing on luck.
Well, and I think that's a good place to leave it, because
Yeah,
that's a good what to do about it, something you can take from it. So let's take a quick break to let me go refill my drink.
Well, I wanted to say one thing too. I meant to say at the beginning of this, but okay. So on our social issue episodes, we have a consistent dislike person. And I know it's a real person and not a bot, because it's not on our Wheel of Time episodes. It's only on our social issue episodes. And they watch for like 30 seconds, long enough to hit the dislike and whatever lag on their phone is or whatever. Hey man, or girl, or they, or whatever you are, leave a comment.
Yeah.
It's not that it kills me. It just, I found the pattern, and the pattern is funny. So of course I'm saying this now, they only watch for 30 seconds. So I should have said it at the beginning. So remind me to say this at the beginning next time. But this consistent disliker, just leave a comment or something, because maybe we could get better from it realistically. But I think I know who it is, because we had one dissenter in our original woke Wheel of Time stuff that actually commented and said, I didn't even watch the video, I just know what you're going to say. And if you remember, I went back and forth with that person a couple of times, and so it might be that person. That's my theory.
That would amuse me.
That would amuse me. But yeah, we'll come back in just a second, and then we're going to talk about girls and dads.
Yeah.
All right, sorry for that little blip. We are back, and our drinks are refilled, and we're ready to talk about male role models for females developing, I think is the best way to say it. Do you want to start it off, or?
Yeah, I want to preface this with where this came from, which is in our Wheel of Time talk last time, where it kind of dawned
I had an
on
epiphany.
You had an epiphany that we somehow hadn't had before, which is that the character Nynaeve is raised by her father, and he's her primary influence, and you can actually see that in her, not only her personality, but then her ability to use the magic of the world,
which is based on your gender or sex. Excuse me, sex.
Yeah, which is one of the things
we need to use those properly.
Which is one of the things that annoyed us so much about the Amazon Prime series, because for some reason they decided to make her an orphan, and to add insult to this injury, they turn Matt's father, who is very influential on him, into a drunken man whore, an alcoholic man whore. And well, actually, no, he's the cheating man whore, so his mother's the alcoholic. Yay, drama.
So for those that follow along, he's the narcissist in the relationship, and she's the codependent that uses addiction to cope with the trauma. So
yeah, which I guess, to their credit, they show how that influences Matt's personality in the series, but that's why Matt's personality is so freaking different in the series.
Well, to the credit of the series is you don't get a lot of real Matt personality till way after they are in the story progression. But at the same time, they kind of made him a dickweed, and his dad, which is one of our favorite, both of ours, I think, non-main characters in the whole story, they kind of made into this piece of shit human being to try to push their story along. But let's get back to Nynaeve. In the series, she's raised by her father, and that's why she had the skills she did to track the people that left the two rivers, and what we kind of came upon accidentally and just kind of blurted out of my mouth and this is where I am at because things just come to me and blurt out instead
Mhm.
of a lot of planning involved. But it was the fact that she has trouble with the female side of the magic of this world. And what we've teased out already before this was it's very much in line with the psychological aspects of a female and a male. What are your big five traits? What are your Briggs-Meyer
Yeah.
breakdown? You know, all of these things. There is a bell curve on both sides, and females tend to one side and males tend to the other, and there's overlap in between, right? I think the overlap on agreeableness is like 20%. So that means the tail of that curve is huge for females versus males. So 20% more agreeable in the female side, and agreeableness being one of the big five personality traits. Whereas conscientiousness tends to be almost the flip of that with males versus females. Openness is about the same. Extroversion about the same. So when we really look at this, if you're raised by a man with no female influence, how are you as a woman? What is your dating profile as a woman? How, and this is where I'm, no, go ahead and go with that. And then I'm going to add a third dimension to it.
Well, and like you pointed out when we were talking the other night, is in expounding on this idea, then because of that, it's not really an accident that Nynaeve falls for the manliest man in the book series.
Yeah. Okay. So that was
Right?
the third element I was going into. Yeah. So, do women that are raised by men tend to have a different expectation of the men they date versus women who are raised just by the mother or without a good male role model? And that's the big question. And that's what I really, I found very, 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 very little literature on this. I searched and searched, and unfortunately, I found one thing, and it was behind a paywall, unfortunately. So, shoot, this is all from. Oh, two. I found two, and both were behind a paywall, unfortunately. Screen. So I found this one, and for those that don't know, with research paywalls, it's like $40 an article.
Really?
Yeah. So unless you're like a member of this is what I miss about being in school is when you did your student login, you had access to all this stuff. But the importance of fathers in relationship to their daughters' psychosexual development, and the father-daughter relationship, and the personality development of a female. So I'm going to try to find a way to get to these without the paywall, but we're just going to again give the overview today. But there's obviously a developmental kind of I'm having trouble with the word, influence to having a father versus not. No, it doesn't have to be father. A male influence, I should say, as to not.
Well, the reason we focus on fathers is, one, because we have had for decades a growing epidemic of fatherless households, so it's pretty glaring. And two, because that's going to be the male role model who you are around most frequently, just because because there are only so many hours in the day, and he's there in the house that you live in. So it's the most obvious and the most influential, or potentially influential.
And this has been around for a while, because it's no surprise that a female who is raised in a household where the father abuses the mother gets into a relationship and accepts the abuse cycle, right? We can take this with any trait where there is a cycle, and it's always up to someone to break the cycle. The problem is that to break the cycle, you need a lot of help along the way and a lot of effort on your own.
Well, because first you have to recognize the cycle, which if you're subsumed in it, you don't see the forest for the trees, because that's just life to you.
Here's a great example of that. Women who had male siblings are 50% less likely to be sexually abused or sexually assaulted as they grow up. And we can go into speculating why, right? Is it because they have big brothers, so guys aren't going to mess with them? Probably not. Because if I go out to a bar and I meet a girl, I don't know what her sibling status is going into the subsequent relationship steps as far as a guy. No, it's probably because they can read male social cues much better.
That's right? What I was going to say. Probably two things is one, what you just said, but then also the male influence. There's a reason why the Wheel of Time book series uses the yin yang symbol so much, because it is a perfect visual, physical representation of this metaphysical idea of complementarianism. So that male role model is going to complement their feminine traits with some masculine traits, so that they are able to interact with males at least a little bit like males interact with each other, which is going to help protect them a little bit.
Let's get a little uncomfortable here and talk about Freud.
Oh no.
So the old cliche, which is actually true, is men look for women that remind them of their mother. Right? Why is that? The question is, why is that? And we look for maternity. It's a simple answer that has complex underpinning concepts behind it. But the simple answer is we do look for maternity. And what better source of an ideal of maternity is the person who gave birth to you and nurtured you, right? So,
and who you see every day of your childhood life.
So you look for your mother, and that's true. So when we look at the females, if you have a strong male role model in your life, that's probably going to affect how you look at men as you grow up and develop. So I am actually really surprised, and maybe this is a little bit of patriarchy here that we need to address, that there's so little literature on the female development with a father versus the male development with a mother, right? So any psychology students out there that are looking for your master's thesis, here you go. Here's something right here for you. But why would it be any different is the question I ask. And the fact that it just makes sense to me, which is not scientific, but it's the start of science. It just makes sense to me.
I think the focus on boys and what kind of men they become is simply illustrating the differences between boys and girls, because when boys have this imbalance, then they become violent or aggressive. That's why you have such a huge spike in crime rates with young men who grew up without a father.
Well, and I think it's important to go into why that happens. So, shoot, I wish I would have had all this stuff prepared, because you took me down a path.
I wasn't trying to go down the path. The point is that
but
there's such an imbalance there. There's got to be, to your point, there's got to be an imbalance with the girls as well, but it's going to manifest differently. And
I think we can tease out why, though, if we go into the boys. So the reason why boys become violent when they don't have a father figure is because they, from a young age, with only the mother, and this is a bell curve. This is not every instance. They tend to learn from an emotional state versus from a conscientious state, because that's the difference between mothers and fathers typically in a relationship. And so when they learn to respond from an emotional state, and then they get they hit a puberty kind of time frame as a boy, that manifests. So add high testosterone, high aggression to an emotional response learning pattern, and you have a recipe for violence, because it's the only thing they know. Not that mom was violent, but mom was emotional. And mom taught them to respond emotionally to situations, which is one reason I'm having a big problem with the social emotional learning movement that's going on in schools.
Yeah.
But that's a whole conversation on its own, because we need our young men to be able to respond from a conscientious state, not an emotional state, because they're high in testosterone.
Because when women get emotional, they cry. When men get emotional, they hit things.
They hit things. Yeah, exactly. So we flip it around. So now we get back to our conversation. If you're taught from a conscientious state early on, how does that change how you respond to life going forward? And personally, in the current marketplace, I think it actually is very beneficial, because then you become one of the boys. Then you become successful despite your gender. So it's, I don't know. We can tease down this. I don't know where we wanted to go with it. We started with the book, but how far you want to go in this? We can get ourselves canceled. I don't care. We have 48. Someone's unsubscribed to us. We have 48 followers. Maybe that unsubscriber was our disliker. I don't know.
Well, the reason I brought up Matt when we were first talking about this is because, you know, as we've kind of been going down this trail here, is that you can see his father's influence on him, and it's a little bit different than what Nynaeve's father's influence is on her, because as a female, she's going to take those lessons and adapt them differently than what a male will, but the influence is still there. It's instead of on the female side, that father is going to influence in a complementary way. Now it can become overbalanced, which is kind of where we got started on this, because that happens with Nynaeve, is she kind of becomes overbalanced in masculine traits, whereas with Matt, it hones his masculine traits. It focuses his masculine traits because there's something natural to him. I don't remember when you got me going down this train of thought. One of the things that occurred to me was, women generally, you know, more radical feminist type women like to complain that that assertive men don't like assertive women because they call them, you know, queen bees. They don't like that. Well, no, it's not that we don't like assertive women. It's that for most of them, it's unnatural. And so they're trying to be one of the guys, but it's an obvious counterfeit. And so it rubs men the wrong way, versus you know, just about anyone probably could think of an example of a female that's just one of the guys, and she may act very similar to that queen bee, but she's not thought of in the same way, because to her it's more natural. It's a more natural interaction rather than trying to be what you think assertive masculinity is. And you see that in the book series, because Nynaeve is still a very feminine woman. She still has a lot of feminine traits. She just also has these masculine traits that are much more accentuated than the other women that she interacts with.
Well, we can take this back to a guy standpoint. I get that book, the assholeology, that I put up sometimes. There is a very fine line between being an assertive person and an asshole. It really is a fine line. So the same thing goes with what you're talking about. There's a fine line between being a strong female and a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
And where that line is can shift with the situation, which is one of the things that makes it difficult. But yeah, as a dude, you can be a very assertive, open, honest guy. And at some point you could cross the line and you're an asshole.
Yeah.
The same thing is what you're talking about with the
Yeah.
female. You can be a very assertive, independent woman, but at some point you can cross the line to being kind of a bitch. And
I just realized there's an example of that in the books too.
which was that?
Sawan.
Oh yeah.
Her primary influence was her father. She helped her father in his fishing. She was part of his world, part of that masculine world. And then she was whisked away to be raised by all women who were very
I can think of a third example.
Who were often very bitchy. And she definitely comes across, especially in the early books, as that queen bee. Her masculinity is very different than Nynaeve's, but they butt heads immediately because of that masculinity.
I can think of a third example. Fail. She's a daddy's boy. She's a daddy's boy. Or daddy's girl. Daddy's girl, excuse me. Yeah. So yeah, I think
but actually that's a good example, because she's definitely a daddy's girl, but she also had a very strong mother to temper that influence.
Well, that whole culture was built around that relationship. And so it's almost like a macro level version of what we're talking about, where dad is the manly man, but mom is the strong female, which realistically it was the old Mongol empire, but that's another talk when we get to Wheel of Time, when we get to that point in it. But I feel this because I only have a son, right? But I have a niece, and she lost her father a couple years ago, and I've been that for her. And you can see it. You can see it in every interaction. It's, I want to look up to a man. And she's 9? Yeah, 9 now. So she's 9. And you can feel that in every interaction. At some point, she's going to grow into her own woman. But how she grows into it, I know exactly where I am in that part. And that's setting the example. And hopefully I set the example to where she doesn't date people like my friends, but because then I'd have to be in a lot of fights as an old man. But we'll see where that goes. Which is funny because one of my best friends, he's kind of the person I would never let her date, but he's got a daughter. So we'll see how that turns out, because I might have to be polishing a gun on his doorstep at some point. But well, you've got a daughter.
Yes. Is
she dating yet?
No, thank goodness. It's very different and very difficult, because, and someone with more psychology could maybe explain why this is, but when your son begins to hit puberty and begins to grow into a young man, there's a much easier and natural way to deal with that and interact with it. When that happens to your daughter, there is instead almost a sense of loss, because no matter how old your daughter gets, she never stops being your baby girl and your little princess. And I don't know exactly why that is, but it is a truism that influences the father-daughter relationship a lot.
I wonder if it has, going way back thousands of years, I wonder if it has to do with the investment on reproduction. Because as a male, I can spread my seed all I want, and some are going to be viable, some aren't, depending on what the mother does. But as the female, you have to go through the process. You can't just hit it and quit it, right? And I don't know how much of that is inherent in our behavior.
That for the father, there's an ingrained anticipation that this
Someone's going to hit it, let it
child
leave.
is
Yeah,
becoming a
yeah.
woman. Well, even if not, it's the anticipation that at some point this child is going to be a young woman and leave you to join another family, to start her own family.
Now we got to go cross cultures, because there's so many examples of how that occurs, but there's also so many examples of how it's actually not the same.
Mm.
You know, what people in, especially the United States, fail to realize is how much diversity there is around the world. So I want to say it's in the Himalayas, where all the brothers marry one female, because there's so few resources to go around. Basically, they hedge their bet that they all get together and they share the resources, and they all marry one female, which there's more males than females in that society. And you at least know your genetics are being pushed along, because she has to be pregnant with one of your kids, one of you as brothers. So you all marry one female, and whoever's baby it is, you all take care of it. And there are other societies, some in Africa, which are hunter-gatherer societies, where the men don't even take care of what they may think is their kid. They take care of their sister's kids, because they know their sister's kids are their same genetic progeny. But when it becomes to the girls they've had sex with, they don't know, because only the female knows whose kid it is. And so we don't understand the genetic diversity of the world enough to actually play into a lot of these things. So how that translates back to what we're talking about is, how does the male's interaction affect the female later? And I think it's, to me, it's a setting and an example kind of thing. I hope to set a good example for my niece, as hopefully you're setting a good example for your daughter, right? I have a thought, but I'm trying to formulate it in my head. So,
Well, as you were talking, I kind of had another thought of why that father-daughter relationship is different than the father-son relationship. And I think maybe the biggest component of it may be, and why what you're talking about is so important, is because at some point, you, the father, are going to stop being that example. You are going to stop being the man in her life. And there's going to be another man in her life. And so there's a sense of loss there, because you have lost that position. But there's also a sense of trepidation, because you have to hope that that new man is a good one, is, that she finds and chooses.
it's one reason I stay in fighting shape.
Exactly. So there is a major element to that, because you are going to be, or at least can continue to consider yourself, the man in your son's life, the man that he comes to for advice, for questions, because no matter how old he gets, you're still older, you've still already gone through these things, and he can come to you for manly advice. But your daughter is going to eventually find someone else, and that's going to be the man in her life.
Let me take this down a different path for the last couple minutes here. And this is a pattern that I think I see, and I hope I can find some literature to back it up. But it almost seems to me that the opposite sex parent has more of an influence on the child than the same sex parent. A girl raised with men in the situation seemed to be stronger than a girl raised just by mom, and the exact opposite the other way around. So it's almost like boys growing up tend to defy their father, whereas girls growing up tend to idolize their father, and boys growing up tend to date their mother when it comes to dating time, but tend to girls. No, it is different because girls tend to use their dad as a set point. So I don't know what the difference is there. What because we need to kind of tease this out to be better parents realistically. So what is the father's role? Boys tend to be violent when they grow up without a father, but they tend to defy their fathers when they have a father.
Uh-huh.
Whereas girls tend to be stronger when they have a father, but I don't know what the relationship to the mother is. I'm thinking out loud. So what do you think on that?
Well, I think there's plenty of literature for the boys defying their father. I know I've heard Peterson talk about it a lot. That and this is one of those places where he gets in trouble, is that the difference and the importance with the interaction between males is that there is always the inherent subconscious threat of violence. Well, at some point, the just, you know, the the young baboon is going to be grown enough that he thinks he can take the alpha, and there's almost a need to unseat the alpha. And so that's where the conflict between sons and their fathers tends to come from, is this this need to show that I'm a man now, I'm my own man now. And how that conflict manifests, I think, is going to be in a lot of ways dependent on what kind of example the father set.
Which is important because you see this, and I do have a friend that works at alternative schools, and the biggest complaint is they're always fighting. They're always fighting, cussing at each other and fighting. And what I would, if I had to tell something to these young men, you brought up the becoming the alpha. If you do this at this age in this school, when you're supposed to be getting your degree and moving on in life, you are going to be bowing and scraping to the 5'2" computer engineer that has a degree because you work at Red Lobster and you want a 20% tip. So is this little name calling fight right now the fight you want to fight? Or is becoming a successful human being in modern society the fight you want to fight? Because if you're fighting this fight now, then you will be bowing and scraping to a lesser alpha male at some point in time, because
you're going to make yourself stuck in this time.
Exactly. So you're going to be begging and scraping for the scraps from someone who controlled themselves in this moment. And that's what I would tell those kids. And hopefully my son's getting that, although he's kind of a mathlete instead of an athlete. So I don't think I'm going to have a problem with that. But I don't know. I have trouble. I still know I have to guide the niece along as she goes. And that's really, maybe that's part of it. Again, I'm thinking out loud. Maybe it's the thinking outside the box because you're not a girl as a dad, you know, as an uncle, or whatever your role is, you know, the surrogate dad. Maybe it's the thinking outside the box that makes you actually more successful at it. Because you're trying to raise a girl when you don't know what it's like to be a girl. So,
well, our last section kind of ended on a good note. We found an end of a way to wrap it up and say this, you know, here's some advice going forward. And here we just went in circles and chased our tails and ended up nowhere because we're thinking out loud here.
Yeah. Well, Well, this is something I kind of wanted to say in one of the intros at one point is, people have opinions and you make statements based on what you think and what you've researched, hopefully. And 99 out of 100 times, I'm thinking out loud. I have no foregone conclusion. I have directions I'm going, but I have no foregone conclusions. That's not how science works. And even when I have an opinion, it's a development of a further thought. So yeah, hammer me on what I say, but at the same time, understand that it's a developing thought.
Yeah.
Everything I say is a developing thought. And hopefully that helps people have good discourse, because we're all developing thoughts. It's just some people attach that to a conclusion and get married to it. And I'm not married to everything I say. I think I actually appreciate the times you've turned me around on some of my thoughts, because I never would have done it without saying my thought out loud and then you rebutting. So, and I hope it's happened the other way around. So for everything else, leave a comment, like, subscribe, send us around. I need to share our last one, because I think that was one of our best ones. I re-listened to it yesterday. Which one was it? The abortion debate, where we actually had what our solutions were to it, because I think we actually had a very productive conversation there. So I'm going to go ahead and share that one all over as much as I can. If anybody has any suggestions of how we can further our voice, we're open to that as well. So anything you want to add to that?
Nope.
All right. Well, I'm going to go out in this heat and see if I can grill some burgers.
Hey, good plan.